Good morning. Continuing the review of the conclusion of Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1433. I'm sorry, 1432. 1432. We're learning the process of how our actions trigger Malchus of Atzilus, and that's where the main interaction takes place, what he calls the shinui, the shift, the change, because our actions in turn generate and cause God, who is like using the potter's wheel to maneuver and to manage and govern existence according to our actions. So we're going to be learning here, and we're in the middle of learning this fascinating process that on one hand, there's a direct level in Ishtalshalos, or namely Malchus of Atzilus, which in turn manifests in Islapshus, the lower level of Malchus, into Biyah, that is where this main station, you can say, the main place where the two meet, heaven and earth, our actions and the divine. Now, obviously, higher levels of the divine are also connected to all of this, but as we're going to learn, they're more in a state of Leishanisi. They're there in place, and based on how Malchus opens and closes, you can call it the gauge or the valves, that's how much chesed or gvura will flow from the higher levels. But where's that taking place? It's in Malchus. So we have here both advantages. On one hand, you have Shinui, which connects to our existence, which is all about change and behavior and the governance of existence, which goes through all types of shifts and changes. But we also have a relationship with God who's higher than Ani Hashem Leishanisi, to the higher levels of Elikus, in Atzilus, and higher than Atzilus, and even higher than that, as we've been learning. So specifically, what we're up to right now is, after explaining how Atzilus is like an interface, especially the midas of Atzilus, from the word medida, they measure the flow, but Atzilus still is a very divine entity. And as such, relative to Biyah, is like Ein Sof and Bli Gvul. That's why you need to have Malchus. Malchus is where the pareches, the parsa, like a partition that conceals and diminishes the flow, that it should be measured and be able to be contained by the world of Gvul in Bria. And in Malchus itself, which is itself a Mehelam Be'etzem, like he said, like the moon. It's a Helam. There's levels of Malchus. There's Malchus as a Makabel, as it receives from the higher levels. That's the higher level of Malchus. And then there's Malchus as a Mashpia. Like he said, V'amuna Kol Zeis, you have V'kayim Aleinu, so you have both the feminine Makabel and the Mashpia, which is lower Mashpia. And the Mashpia is only the Chitzenius, only the Ha'ara of Ha'ara. The higher level is called Yam, like sea. The lower level is called land. So the sea, all the rivers flow to the sea, but then it gets concealed, and only a small diminished level goes into Biyah. And that too is in a form of Islapshus, like he said, Ma Yafa Pamayich Nalayim, in the level of Matat, the angel, or the Nal, as he called it, the sandal. It's a state of Helam, and state of Helam, in addition to this Lavush. However, the Hamshach is coming not from Malchus. Malchus is just a channel that carries it downward. It's coming from the higher levels, but Malchus is regulating the flow. And that's why it's called a mocker for Biyah. And that's why Ma'aser Tachtenim is Negeya there. Because Malchus is engaged with and is relating. It's like, think of the teacher or the minister, or that level that is engaging with and measuring the flow according to the Tachtenim. So obviously there's a relationship with Tachtenim. Whereas the higher levels, even though Atzilus, Midas of Atzilus is also Medida measure, but it still hasn't gone through these channels that conceal. So therefore it still remains, somewhat relatively speaking, a level of Blikvul, of Ein Sof. Here, Malchus is Negei Maisa Tachtenim, she Mesapeches, and Malchus turns based on the efforts and the affairs of human beings, our activities, our Maisa Tachtenim. And he gave a few examples for that. One at the end of Parsha Bereshis, Vayesasev al Libei, that God regrets and feels sad over the creation. So he says, Libei is Malchus. How could you say such an expression? Because that's talking about a Lakus as it's in Malchus. Sometimes we speak in the positive, that his face is shining. That's also Pnei HaMalchus, with the many different illuminated colors. And then he also brought Vayar Elikim Eser Kitev, when God saw the light and he said it was good. This is referring to Maseim Shel Tzadikim. Vayar Elikim is also Malchus. So bottom line is, we see from all these expressions that, and you see throughout the Torah, that our actions below have an effect on above. But what level is it? Malchus. I'm going to explain that now. We're going to start from there. So we're on the third line, top of page 1432. So Malchus is the place where the engagement takes place, essentially the affairs of human beings, their governance, and how our actions affect the higher worlds. It's all happening in Malchus. But, as we learned the word, Ma'aser Tachtenim, came Mesapeches B'chinas HaMalchus. So the wheel, the governing wheel, if you wish, the cosmic wheel of existence, with which you can say like a wheel. I mean, he uses Potter's wheel, but you can also think of it like a captain of a ship turning the wheel. That wheel is determined by our actions, as we learned earlier, the Zohar. But then he adds now, so there's two things happening. Our actions trigger in Malchus, it should turn to the right, to the left, basically based on our actions. If it's good actions, it creates a flow of good, and if it's negative actions, it creates a negative flow of Gvura. But where's Malchus receiving that flow? It's true, it's happening in Malchus, but Malchus itself is not the one that is the source of the Hamshacha. It's coming from the higher spheres, as we learned. So that's why he says, according to how Malchus is reacting to our behavior, that is how Malchus draws down, according to that, is the way Malchus receives the Hamshacha Mulmaila. So think of it, there's Chesed and Gvura of Atzilus. Chesed, Gvura, Sefiros. We spoke about Chesed, Gvura, and Rachamim. They're all three divine attributes. And as we learned earlier, they're divine attributes not due to our actions. God, b'sat shleimus ha'atzmus, shleimus of Elikus, he has all these attributes and chose to manifest in these attributes. How do you access them? So our actions affect Malchus, and Malchus accordingly will draw from these spheres as manifesting it below, based on our actions, positive or negative. That's what he's going to explain now. So that's what he says, the Eifen Kazeh, meaning Eifen of Ma'aser Tachtenim, which causes the wheels to turn. Think of it this way. The potter's wheel is the example in Zohar, but I'm going to just for a moment use a driver, or the one who the captain of a ship. He's using the wheel to turn the ship. So when you turn a wheel in any vehicle, the wheel is not the vehicle. The wheel is just guiding the vehicle. When you turn the wheel one way, the vehicle will go that way. When you turn the wheel another way, it'll go to the left or to the center, whatever way you turn it. The same thing, let's say in a ship, when a wheel is being turned, the wheel in turn is causing and drawing, whether it's from the engine room or wherever, the other aspects of the ship that have caused the ship to be the power that power the ship and cause the ship to move, the wheel is guiding and saying, okay, now go in this direction. So basically, Malchus is the wheel. But the wheel, in turn, is activating the different elements that make a ship move. If you just had a wheel, someone gave you a wheel, and the wheel was not connected to the engine room or to the other parts of the vehicle that you're moving, you're not going to go anywhere. The wheel is not the one that causes. The wheel is the instrument that we're given that controls how we should travel and what direction and how quick and so on. But it's not the force. It's like a wheel is just in your hands, and so therefore, Malchus is the guide, is the regulator, but it's based on how much what it's makabel from above it, which is being fed or channeled through Malchus. So he's going to explain this now. So on line 4, page 1432, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. It was explained earlier, talking about page 1357 and on. Spoke about the moon has nothing of its own. Lesla megarma, garma means nothing. Lesla megarma of its own. Garma means of its own. Klum doesn't have anything of its own. She yes beis pirushim. I referred to it yesterday. There are two meanings in that. What does it mean it has nothing of its own? So whatever it has, where is it coming from? So Pirush Aleph was the first Pirush. Ha'aleph shemekabelis mamayla. It doesn't have it on its own. It receives what is given from above. Like the moon doesn't have light of its own, but when it reflects the sun, so it's receiving from the sunlight, and that in turn it reflects, and that's moonlight. Ha'beis, the second interpretation is it's mekabel from below. Shemekabelis melmato. What causes it to have something is our actions below. Ma'aveda sa nivroim. From the Aveda, the work of the creations, or the creatures. So those are two interpretations as we learned earlier in Malchus. And now we're going to see how they come together. So he says like this, Vishneim emes. And we also learned that was the expression. Both are true. It's not two opinions. It's not two different approaches. They're both true. Malchus, indeed, has both elements. That's makabel from above and makabel from below. The zer shemakabelis mamayla, that which it receives from above, what causes it to receive from above? Zeu aidei ha'lo hamagia lo milmata. That is triggered by the Allah Asman, the effort that we make from below. In other words, Malchus itself is not just drawing energy from above. When our actions below, in turn trigger the wheel that we learned from the Zohar, that God will turn the wheel according to our actions. So now Malchus is going to receive from above according to those actions. So what is Makabel Lamata is what causes Malchus to what it should be Makabel Milmaila. It's a little similar to what we spoke about, that the way you project, when you have a smiling face, you get a smile in return. Here, there's a third element. We are the ones that initiate from through our Aveda. That in turn causes Malchus to be in a certain form and shape, which in turn causes Malchus to draw accordingly from the higher levels. So Malchus plays a critical role, essentially like the gatekeeper here, that is affected by us, but in turn is drawing accordingly from above. I mean, when I think about it from a technology point of view, it's like when a programmer, a coder, writes program. So he says there's always the rules go like this. If the variable is A, and A does so and so, then B should be as follows, which will equal that C should respond as so. And all these different codes are all about scenarios. So if basically someone presses a certain button, that in turn, this program is telling it, then in turn, this and this should happen next. So when you, for example, open up a program on a computer on your phone, and then you want to close the program, you press close. What do you think is happening? You're not actually closing the program. You're prompting it. The close that you're pressing is in turn triggering the program to create a whole chain of a series of like an assembly line of events that will ultimately shut down the program, meaning that you won't access it. But it's all being done, it's all electronic and all digital. It's not you're not closing the door, technically. So similarly, just as an example, So our efforts below in turn trigger in Malchus so and so, whatever that may be, for positive or negative, and Malchus in turn will, based on that, will draw from what is higher than Malchus to be mamshich that below. Because through halos man, again, remember, halos man is a Kabbalistic terminology for asarusa dilatata. It literally just means the elevation that comes from Maya Nukvin, the feminine waters, which means it's coming from below as we're doing our avodah that is elevated upwards. So we call it halos man. The opposite of halos man is amshachas mad, the amshach of Maya Tchurin, the masculine waters. Amshachas Maya Tchurin. That's the hashpah. So, for example, when we say, let's say, the rain that falls on that waters our fields, right? So that rain is coming from the evaporated water of the seas. So the evaporation of the seas would be like halas man. The eid yalam in haaretz, as the pasuk says in Bereshis, a vapor rose from earth, and that in turn causes a geshem from above. So it's essentially, when we say im b'chukeisei telechu, the pasuk says, when you'll follow my laws, v'nasati gishmeichem be'item, I will send the rains in their time, or gishmeichem means gashmias, as the Baal Shem Tov interprets. So there's always a cause and effect. The cause here is ma'aseh tachteinu halas man shalamato. That in turn will draw down through Malchus from whatever level that is it's accessing. Through our effort below, we'll call a rotze, a yearning, a longing, an aliyah into Malchus. That's our avodah. It's like when you daven, or you do a mitzvah, whatever it is that you're doing, halas man, your avodah. That creates a rotze aliyah b'chinas Malchus, u'kumei v'achayis neses. Sheneses is a kisei. Like we say, the chayis refers to certain angels that carry the supernal throne, the divine throne. Sheneses is a kisei. They're carrying it. That means it's from the bottom up. They're carrying the throne they're holding it up. Valkain. And therefore, lefi eifan alos man shalamato, commensurate to, and directly as a result of the effort from below, kain hu amshachim umayla b'chinas hamalchus. That will determine how the amshacha will come into Malchus and from Malchus to us. Okay. And now he's going to bring a zoyar that states it explicitly, this point here. Again, to emphasize again, why do we need these levels? Because there's an infinite distance between the divine and existence, and that's why we have a Seder Shtalshlos. The whole point of Seder Shtalshlos is there should be something in common. Can you go straight to the king, and the king will give you everything you need? Hypothetically, you could, but that's not how it's set up. The king has ministers, and the ministers have assistants, and the assistants have further assistants. There's all departments. You want something, you have to submit a request. That's Ma'aseh Tachtenim submits a request, and that request then is submitted by Malchus to higher levels, which in turn draw it all down. Now, obviously, God is behind it all. This is not, God forbid, something replacing. There's no partnership here. This is the process of how God does it, similar to what we say, that the Torah gave permission for a doctor to heal. Why do you need permission? Because healing is Ani Hashem Rafecha. God is the healer. But God wanted that to bestow that power, so he gave the power and the permission that a human being could learn medicine, and God allows us to have the wisdom to understand and discover how the body works, and what makes it heal, and what keeps it healthy, and so on. So the doctor essentially is a shliach of Hashem. But when you go to a doctor, you're really accessing God's power of healing. Any good doctor, any humble doctor, honest doctor will say, I don't heal. God is the healer. The body has a natural healing process. I can facilitate to make sure that the conditions are right, that the healing process should manifest. But it's not the doctor is the healer. So the doctor is a facilitator. It's an important role, obviously, because he knows how to do it. He or she knows how to do it. But it's the same idea. And the same thing with the Malachim that we learned about and we will learn about. When they serve as the cosmic digestive system, they're not in control. It's part of God's plan. He set in motion a whole series of a process that creates that will regulate the flow, distribute it, and allocate, and so on, as we just learned earlier. So that's the role here of Malchus. And now he's going to talk about a Zoya that brings this out, but let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
I understand we have cause and effect on our life in microcosmos. How about the microcosmos? Is our actions influence more than just for us?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Our actions affect Malchus, yes. So what are you saying? What
and then how it influences on a bigger perspective for the whole world, not just for us, but if it has any changes in the life, for example, of animals.
Well, like the Rambam says that when a person does a good deed, we learned about it earlier. On top of page 1430, he said that when a person does a mitzvah, he tips the scales and affects himself, but also the entire world benefits from it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So continuing on, this actually is also a text from the Biri Azer of the Tzemach Tzedek. He continues. The Zeir Tetzaveh Daf Kuf Peidalad Amid Beis 184b. V'zel Shene. So he's actually citing the language from the Zeir. Ubesarusa dilatata. So the Zeir used the expression asarusa dilatata. Sarusa is an Aramaic hisedus. The awakening from below, the stimulation, the arousal from below, means halosman, our effort from below. Isayed hachi nami le'ela. Also awakens something accordingly above. The itema, and if you wonder, says the Zayar, he'eich yachil kolo dilatata. How can a voice from below, oy asurusa dilatata, or an awakening or stimulation from below, Isayir hochinami, lisada hochinam, lisada hochinami, how is it possible that we have the power from below to create a response from above? If you're wondering, tochazi, the Zohar continues, come and see. Al metata, the lower worlds, bechinas malchus, kaima lekabla todir. It was established to always be a recipient. The malchus of bechinas makabel. Like the parentheses is the Rebbe Rashab's additions. Like we learned above, the Malchus is a state of makabel, like the moon. Who ikre even tova, and it's called like a precious stone or illuminated stone. And the Rebbe Rashab explains, what does that mean? Yeshlemer b'chinis yisod de nukva. That's referring to the level of yisod in nukva. Heper b'chinis even ofel, v'tzalmoves. The opposite of a dark, and Talmovis is essentially like a shadow of death. So you say the nukva the klipa. So in other words, Malchus is like a stone, but a bright stone. The opposite of a dark and negative energy type of stone, which is the sort of nukva of klipa. We're talking about nukva Malchus of kedusha. So Even Tova means a bright stone, like similar to what we say like a moon, that's illuminated, but it's not its own illumination. Even Tova, but al milo Lo yavle ela kegavna deiyu kayoma. And the higher worlds don't give to Malchus, don't transmit to Malchus, only accordingly, only kegavna ela kegavna deiyu kayoma, only according to the way it is functioning. In other words, Malchus is that in between place, and zeiyu kayoma benihira de ampin. If Malchus is shining a glowing face, metata kedein hachi nadanle mileila. So accordingly, from above, it will respond with a smiling face or a bright face. The iyu kayoma batsiva, and if Malchus is in a state of sadness, the opposite of happiness, yavin le dina bekable. What is given to it is dina, judgment. Because of Migdash Melech is a commentary on the Zayar. The kan move on kama garua inyana atzvus. And here we understand how despicable, or you could say how not despicable is not the right word, garua, how lowly or how inferior, how bad, how damaging you can say is atzvus, the depression and sadness. Because according to the Zayar, basically sadness from below, meaning which will cause sadness within Malchus, will in turn draw down din from above. A smile from below, or a happiness from below, a shining face, will draw down a shining face from above. That's the process. That's the Zohar. I mentioned the other day, this is a Zohar I saw the Rebbe once write to someone. Brings the Zohar who was writing to the Rebbe, he's very depressed, he's very down. So the Rebbe quoted this Zohar, that the face you show below is the face that will be shown to you. But here it's interesting, what he's saying here is obviously Malchus is receiving it from us below. But it's Malchus that, the face of Malchus is what in turn will be drawing down from higher than Malchus. But we affect, of course, Malchus. So Malchus is essentially like a reflection of our Avodah, which in turn causes the response from the higher levels of Malchus to respond accordingly. So clearly the Zohar says exactly what he said earlier, how our actions have this impact. So the Malchus is where the impact takes place, and through Malchus, Malchus then draws accordingly from the higher levels, whether it's the positive energy or the negative energy. Any questions?
I have a question. I mean, I don't know if he's going to get into it. I don't remember from the last time we did this, but the notion that our behavior, halasman, causes a reflection in Malchus, and that it essentially draws down from above it whatever we are doing or not doing below. He says it like ipso facto, like it just happens. But like, what's the mechanism for that? Like, I mean, Malchus. So I don't know. I'm upset. I'm unhappy, and I'm frowning at the world. So Malchus says, he's frowning. We're going to frown back at him. What does that then? Then Gvura says, Malchus says we have a deficiency in Gvura down there. I'm going to send some Gvura down. Here's the Gvura. Here, go give this Gvura to this person who's frowning at the world. Is that a mashal?
I gave the best mashal that I gave before was a program. You press a button on a computer or on your phone, and it triggers something, which in turn triggers something above it. What's bad with that mashal?
No, that's good.
I mean, you can use any example that works.
But
it's a process in place that it's just like, hey, I just said, the Torah says, when you'll follow my laws, I will give you the reins in their time. So it's midah connected midah. The whole Torah is based on that. Measure per measure. God says, as you do your thing, this will be the response. Here he's talking more the actual dynamics and the mechanics of it, what levels it is. That Malchus is that in-between level, that is the regulator, like the wheel, and Malchus in turn is drawing from the higher levels. But if you took, if you just spoke in simple English, it simply means that our actions below and our Veda gets a response from above.
You do have like the tzaddik v'ra Rosh v'tovla kind of thing.
It's another discussion. Why doesn't it always seem to work when you see a person that does good things? Why isn't it drawing down good? That's a good question. And I already addressed it earlier, actually. But now he's talking the way it was set into motion. Then there's questions why good people suffer and why bad people prosper and so on. But that's not what he's addressing right now. He's talking now the general process of how God set in motion. I mean, just like God said, as I mentioned before, a doctor, the same thing is you plant the seed in the ground and you water it and you do everything to cultivate it. There's a process that it will trigger, that seed will start growing into something. If you don't do it right, it won't grow properly. If you plant the wrong seeds or you do a destructive behavior, it'll in turn create destructive consequences. A person puts their hand in fire, there's a cause and effect. That hand will get burned, God forbid. And the same thing in the positive way. You eat the right foods, it triggers all the healthy reactions of your body. You eat bad foods, it'll trigger the other reactions. So if you want to put it very, very simple, it's just simply basically that. What he's explaining here is the levels in the spheres of Atzilus and how it comes into Biyah, where it all plays itself out. But the bottom punchline is very practical, actually. Okay. The next section, I'm just going to sum up. I'm not going to read the whole thing inside because it's a little dense. I'll just say this. He wants to explain what the Zohar said, kola dilatata. He didn't just use asus dilatata, he also said the voice from below. So the Rebbe Rashab is explaining that that the Zohar is talking about the koil shefer, that the sound of the shefer below is mamshich from the earth of Bina. So I'm not going to read it all. I'll say it about Pel, just orally interpret. He basically wants to demonstrate that the Zohar, the kol, is also referring to the same idea, that the kol shefer below, Mavaya Sham, the Zohar explains, just a second, that Bina encompasses all the levels above. Now, Bina, of course, is higher than Malchus. So the voice, the kol shefer travels upwards into Malchus. Malchus, in turn, carries it up into the higher levels. And we're mamshich, Bina, from Bina, which encompasses all the levels. And that's why it's called Al Me'ilah. Remember, he said Al Metata and Al Me'ilah, because it receives from Shem Havaya de La'ela. As I said, I'm not going to do a lot of explaining here. I just want to sum it up in context. You could always go back if you want to learn this to my first time I taught it a few years ago when we first learned it. That's called Shefer Elah, he says. So the Shefer Tata and the Shefer Elah, the Shefer below, in turn, gets a response from the Shefer above, which is Bina, Nihira Kula Bay, and everything shines through that. Chachma and also Atik, by the Kel Shefer Shalamata, Mer Bechin Shefer Shalamayla, Bottom line, Shefer is a perfect example of this process. We sound the Shefer below on Rosh Hashanah. That sound in turn reaches into Malchus. Malchus then allows that, it basically channels that sound upward, and it draws down from Bina all the way from Chachma, from Atik, and through Zah, all the way downward, and also including Rachamim. That's why we know by Shefer that we are transformed. Through Shefer, we transform Midas Hadin to Midas HaRachamim. That's one of the functions of blowing Shefer. Like he says,
So that's
Zohar,
just the opposite of what we were learning about before. Before we were learning to have a sad face, it's going to bring down more. Here we're crying, and the whole thing is a cry and a misery and this and that with the shofar, and that's a permission. It seems like
shofar
exactly
is
the
not
opposite.
shofar is not depression.
But it's
Shofar is not
crying. It's
atzvus.
crying out.
It's a healthy cry. Why are you comparing? Atzvus means sadness and depression. That's negative. A person is.
Okay, that's my point. That it's the opposite.
Shofar is not. He's not talking about that. He's not talking about depression. He's talking about shofar as a particular mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to blow shofar. He's talking about how our efforts below trigger different hamshachos from above. So the Zohar refers to sound. So the Rebbe Rashab is explaining the mitzvah of shofar on Rosh Hashanah in turn triggers all the way these higher levels and brings down the rachamim, like he says. And Zohar Shem b'chinas primi zah, b'chinas meichen chadoshim. Okay, he talks about the different levels that it draws down, and that's rachamim. But now, and so I just wanted to sum up without going into all the intricate details. So now he said, but then the Zohar asked a question. Remember the Zohar said, V'itema. How is it possible that the voice below can trigger something above? So the Rebbe Rashab continues, Valzeh makshe. I'm just skipping a few lines. How can a sus latata reach all the way to bina? When bina is completely a higher, removed level of the divine levels of Natzilus. That's what the Zohar asks. So even though Hagam de bina b'chinas moker korev l'ishtalshlus, like we learned earlier, that Atzilus is a mocker for Ishtalshlus, but it's still removed. It's still Ein Sof. So even though Bina is a mocker Karev, Chachma is called a mocker Rachik, because Chachma is even more removed. It's a mocker Karev for Ishtalshlus, like it says, B'lekut Teire Dibra Amastu B'yem Hashmiris Knishin, Hine B'chinas Anal Da Bina Shenikra Shviyah Zeh B'chinas Pnimius Bina. So we learned that this level of Bina, which is called Shviyah, the seventh level, because when you count from Yesod all the way to Bina is the seventh level from the bottom, it's Pnimius Bina. Like we learned earlier. Bina is called the Eitzer, the repository of Matnas Chinam. Means Matnas Chinam means a gift that is not earned. That means our avodah doesn't reach there. So even though Bina does have a connection to Shtalshus, but it's still removed from us, and it's called Matnas Chinam. It's not directly commensurate to our avodah. That's the question of the Zohar. And specifically what we learned earlier, even the midas of Zoh need Malchus and the whole parsa and the partitions and the concealments because they're own stuff. The koshke b'chinas bina. So that's the question of the Zohar. How's it possible that we reach all the way? Like he said before, Heichen Magia, how do we reach to bina? And this is when the Zohar answers, and this question he answers, v'higdim. That's where he begins. Shebechinas hamalchus hanikra al mitata shemekabelas ma'al me'ilah hi habina nikra al mediskasya shebo is galus atik. That's why the Zohar answers, we don't reach bina. There's malchus that reaches bina. We reach malchus. So we reach malchus. Malchus is called the al mitata, the lower world, which corresponds to the higher world, which receives from the higher world, which is bina, which is called the hidden world, al mediskasya, where you have the revelation of Atik in Bina. Now this Hamshacha from Bina goes into Malchus based on the tikkun of Midas HaMalchus, which that is dependent on our Avodah. If Malchus is a shining face, so that too, that's how the Harisponim, the reflection of the face, will shine to Malchus, v'chein lahepech. And the same, the opposite, that if his face is not shining, like he said, depressed, then that's what will be nimshach. The tikkun zed the Malchus, and this tikkun of Malchus, tikkun could be repair, but here he probably means more the adornment, the shaping of Malchus. Toli b'maisa tachtenim, that is dependent on maisa tachtenim. So the Zohar is answering exactly what he said before, that we don't directly impact Bina and higher than Malchus. Our maisa tachtenim impact Malchus. Malchus, in turn, the way Malchus is directed, like I said, once that wheel is directed a certain way, it will draw down from the higher levels accordingly. Sha'at sham magia mamish yisalo asman de tachtenim. That till there, that's where our avodah reaches, is Malchus. The Allah asman of tachtenim. Magia mamish. So we don't reach higher than Malchus, we reach into Malchus, and Malchus in turn draws down his energies accordingly, according to the way it has been shaped by us. V'nimtze. So what do we derive from this? What's the conclusion? What's the takeaway? Even though that which is higher than Malchus, our avodah below, our Allah asman, our elevation of our efforts don't reach, nevertheless, it's our actions that's the cause to the manner of the hamshacha that goes through Malchus to us. So we don't directly trigger Bina, we trigger Malchus, but we're the cause, we're ultimately the cause. And not just higher than Malchus like Midas, but also Bina, and even Primis HaBina, which is called the Holy of Holies, where you have the Gili Klolos of the Gimel Rishenis, which is Keser, Chachma, and Bina. And that is because, as we explained, according to the personality of the way Malchus has been shaped, which in turn is shaped by us, that's how the Oyer is nimshach from higher than Malchus, all the way from these higher levels. So essentially, there's what we trigger directly, what we trigger indirectly. That's the two levels that he's talking about here. Malchus is what we directly reach to Malchus, and from Malchus already is based on how the wheel turns, is drawing down the proper fitting and appropriate hamshachas according to how Malchus has been shaped by us. That's what he says here. And that's the ultimate answer of how we explain Leishanisi, while there's also Shinui. In Malchus, there's Shinui, but not higher than Malchus. But that doesn't mean there's no impact. It just means that it's not a direct trigger, directly affecting it. In other words, like I said, the king in his palace is intact no matter what. What will be drawn from the king is dependent on our actions. We act in the proper way, so the so-called the minister called Malchus, in turn, presents to the king our behavior, and the king then shines with a positive energy of chesed or rachamim and so on, or all the way bina and higher levels. And of course, the opposite is also true. If our actions are not the right way, and v'yisatzav libay, and God's heart is saddened by our behavior, meaning Malchus, libay Malchus, that in turn will cause the higher levels, different amshachas will come down. But these amshachas are always there, like we learned, if you remember, about the midas lamaila. They're not just reaction to us, midas are there. That's why the Rebbe Rashab negated the thinkers and philosophers that said there are no midas lamaila, because they wanted to avoid the idea of God having emotions that change. Whereas we established there are midas, they're there all the time. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet. The question is, they're shining to us. That's another story. It's like in anything in life. I mean, God is always present. The question is, are we receiving? What are we receiving from these higher levels? That's up to us. So the brachas and amshachas, goodness, like you said earlier, there's no evil from above. It's only teva meitiv, only kindness. The question is it reaching us or not? And that's dependent on Malchus and our actions, where Malchus is essentially the door the doorway, the gatekeeper, like I said, will the chesed shine through that door, or will gvura shine through that door? And that finishes this paragraph on the bottom of page 1432. Any questions?
I have a question. I was just asking myself, how does this fit into the our project here to answer the unanswered questions that the Rebbe asked, but didn't answer because he didn't finish the hemshech. I'm just trying to fit this into the flow, if you will. And I'm asking myself,
but okay, yeah.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. Well, there is a shaila, even if I can't fit it in, which is we talk about one of the primary themes is yichudim and transformation of a nefesh Bahamas, and to bring Atmos and Elikus down to make this world a dira, and to we know what it is. I don't have to. I'm just giving you everyone else what I'm referring to. So in that context, okay, if we do it properly, maybe we can't. Maybe we can. Maybe we can't. We want to be mizbana and contemplate on how the Eibishter is the source of everything. Really, Atmos. If we can, if again we can get there. So in a sense, our tefillot, our kavana is supposed to be reaching way higher than Malchus of Atzilus. We're talking about Asmus. Now, I don't know, most people can't reach that, but that's the goal.
Who said that? This last statement you just made, where does that say that we're reaching? It says we reach Malchus.
To contemplate Yuchad Ila and Das Elyon, you have to contemplate the nature of Asmus, how God sees the world.
Why?
From his perspective.
Just contemplate that God permeates all of existence and that God is beyond existence. What does that have to do with how far our avodah reaches? A contemplation, you can contemplate on anything. You can contemplate on levels here with learning about Bina and higher than Atzilus. You can contemplate on them. The question is if your actual avodah triggers, it triggers what does it actually touch, so to speak. But contemplation, of course, you can contemplate on Atzmus. I mean, everything Chassidus teaches. He's not saying here you can't contemplate on levels higher than Malchus.
But let's say just saying Shema, the one of the primary.
I just said you can contemplate on levels that are higher than Malchus.
But it's more than contemplation. We're supposed to be affecting change in this world, making this world a dira.
In this world change, but not in Ani Hashem Leishanisi. We don't affect change. Why you're taking a leap here that has not been said anything.
Right. Well, I don't know if I'm taking a leap. How do you bring Atmos into this world if we can't touch it?
You reveal something that's already there. Atzmos doesn't need us to bring him into this world.
Okay. Well, that was a perfect answer. All right. No, beautiful. You just gave a great answer. I should have known it already, but thank you. Thank you. Remember, it's 7:30 here a.m., but that was a beautiful answer.
It's fine. I don't have a problem with any questions. As I told, questions are fine. So let me say this. As far as the conclusion of Ayin Beis, the Rebbe Rashab actually does finish this topic. What he doesn't finish are other issues. This topic is part of the process of the contemplation, actually. And it's also, if you recall, this is also how the Malachim, Birchis Yetzer, before Shema, how the Malachim help support. This all began with Hamu Me'ai, if you remember about Rachma Rachmenu.
Yes.
They're like the digestive system. So this is part of the way my neshamas are supported. Malchus is helping the neshamas reach levels that they can connect with the divine in a way that they can integrate it. That's the main focus here. That's the connection. Once we have that in place, that neshama through its contemplation and its avodah can bring Elikus into reveal the divine within it, as well as affect the animal soul, as you said, and as we'll learn, then obviously that in turn is fulfilling the very purpose of existence, which is bringing the higher levels of Yichud into our existence. And we will be able to reach, remember the Neshama is rooted in Atzmus, or Helam Atzmi, or Shmaya Atzmi, Shmaya Kol Batzmus, all these different levels we spoke about. The Neshamas are rooted there. and that will ultimately be revealed. That's correct. But we're talking now the levels of our actual work, where we have to contend with a world where the divine is concealed, and we have to go step by step by step. That's where we are right now.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah. Now, and this is going to be very clear. He's soon going to get back to it in a few pages from now. He's going to talk about the neshamas are rooted higher than Malchus, obviously, and the neshamas are rooted higher than the Malachim for sure. So how does that work? But remember, the eye cannot see in the dark when it's mislabish in the physical eye. The power of vision cannot see in the dark. The neshama down below has to go through these levels because it cannot see on its own without this the giluyim that we're talking about here. Then there's going to be a point where we're going to understand that when we achieve what we have to achieve below, we ultimately access the highest levels, even far higher than Malchus, far higher than Bina even. And then what we do is draw that down into existence in the most revealed way. But we can't get there without going through these stages, because this is the process of the hard work of integrating, like I said, to know where you stand. We are not on the level of Atzmos. We're not even on the level of Atzilus. So we have to, in our terms, in Biyah, in our structures, access this. So we're talking now about those levels. So the next paragraph is going to talk more about this. Let me just see. Yeah, there's going to be another page where he's going to talk about this whole interaction between our avodah and where it reaches above.
So, a follow-up question.
And then, one second, and then he's going to get back to, he's going to sum it up, and he's going to get back to the neshamas malachim. Let me just say one more thing. I've said it a number of times, but it's worthwhile repeating. The importance of this point, because you could say, what's wrong with saying that our avodah does reach Bina or higher? Why are we insisting that Leishanisi? What's wrong with saying God does not change? Absolutely. But then once he created existence and he wants our avodah to impact and create a dir b'tachtenim, then we reach the highest levels and we're mamshech that. The reason is because if that's the case, then he wants to have the divine in its pure and pristine form that's immutable. Remember, we spoke at length, I gave it one of the classes, that we want to integrate loy shinui into shinui. That in a world of change, in a world of time and space, in a moment we should have the infinite, eternity. If you're starting to talk about God being affected, then you're talking about God that's already relating to shinui. So the reason that this is so important is because we want to have a relationship with God also on God's terms, not just on our terms. On our terms, then you simply say there's a lakus like Malchus that relates to us and shifts according to our avodah. But then what about the levels of atzmos that are not affected by anything because they're beyond everything? So you could go ahead and start speaking about kol yochel, that you could say God is so able to do anything that even the level that doesn't change changes. However you explain that, which you can't. It'll just be kol yochel, but that's not good enough. As we said, the whole reason we have ishtalshlus in the first place is because we want it to be in our terms in a way that we can relate to, including the fact that atzmus is beyond shinui, or atzmus, the higher levels of alakus are beyond shinui. So therefore, that's why he really wants to have both elements, the best of both worlds. On one hand, there is a relationship. On the other hand, there's something that's beyond us. And even that beyond is also being drawn down. So this is an advantage, actually, that the higher levels are not directly impacted by us, because then we get them in their purest form. Like he said, matnas chinam. You want to get it in its purest form, not the way it's been altered or shifted or changed by creation. You want to get God in his purest form. So, and you have now both elements. And this explanation works well because it's like the wheel that in turn opens up the right doors and draws from there. without directly changing it, so you're getting the purest form of Elokus. So it's interesting that, in other words, to have a relationship with God means to have a relationship with both aspects, the God that relates to us and the God that's beyond us. And we want that beyond to remain beyond. Because if you don't, then you're basically talking about a God that relates to us. You want to have the God as he's beyond us, and that very beyond is also something we can integrate. Not because God gets closer to us, but because we're able to relate even to that which is completely beyond us. As we learned about being absorbed in something completely beyond us, like seeing God but by not looking idea, as we discussed in many classes. I think that's a vital key point to keep in mind. And with that, I'll stop here at the end of this paragraph on bottom of 1432. I'll make an announcement about my schedule now as well. But first, let me take any questions. Any questions?
But also one point to your point, actually, like just what you just said, is that yes, at some level of Malchut, you could create change. But beyond that, it doesn't mean that your avodah doesn't, because if you're following Torah mitzvot, which is Hashem's will and Hashem's ratzon, pretty much you're on the same page as Hashem. There is no reason to change. That in other words, there's not even a need for it to change, because it's perfection. At that level, you're on the same page as if it was as Hashem. So why would you want to change anything? To your point.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is deep concepts that need a lot of explanation. I'm not suggesting it's exhausted yet, but a lot to think about, to wrap our head around here.
This is the follow-up question I had, and maybe you don't want to go into this, but this is very fundamental. What's the difference between being Megala Elokus in this world that's already here? You said Asmus doesn't need our help, but it really does need our avoda to bring the geula. It really requires us, our efforts.
Well, I don't know if the word need, he wants.
He wants, yeah. And so what's the difference between being Megala Elokus in this world versus being Mamshich? Or is it the same thing?
I need more context. You have to hear the full, what you were trying, what do you, I mean, there's a lot of aspects to what you just asked. Megala Mamshich, I mean.
I'm saying we want to unite the pre-Tzimtzum reality with our reality. That's what you were just saying. And
but remember, from the pre-Tzimtzum perspective, there was no Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum does not conceal the teacher who's concealing his intelligence. It's only the student that can't see it. So there's no change. When a student is learning with the teacher, for him, he has the whole idea very clearly. The Tzimtzum doesn't have any impact on him.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you.
However, the teacher wants the student to feel the same thing.
To find him, yeah.
Yeah. So now, it gets deeper than that as well, because the question you could ask is, does God see it through our eyes? What about God seeing it through our eyes? Yes, I understand God through his eyes. He's basically like, I always say this to people, unfortunately, a Shiva call. I said, the neshama sees you even though you don't see the neshama. God sees us even though we don't see him. The question is, in Das Tachten, like we said, Yedeya and Yedua, God also can look at existence through our eyes. Like a teacher can look through the eye, maybe can't do that, but God can see it through the student's eyes, and the student doesn't see it all. So there is that aspect where we say, Shchinta begalusa, imi anochi betzara, like he said, v'yesatzev al libay, or erdana. All these expressions means that there's a divine that is manifesting in a way that is engaging with us and looks at existence and even at godliness through our eyes. So that's, of course, the lower level. But we want to have both. We want to be able to see existence through our eyes, existence through God's eyes, and then both combined. Essentially, Yechud Tata, Yechud Elah, and the joining of the two.
Yeah, beautiful.
So in other words, to put it in simple terms, when Rabbi Akiva looked at the Harabayas and his friends were crying, and he was smiling, laughing, right? Why they both saw the same thing? They saw destruction. They saw shu'alim. They saw a shu'al, a fox running out of the Holy of Holies. Pretty good reason to cry. What did Rabbi Akiva see that they did not see? He saw, and I'm now quoting from the Rebbe, the Maimer Basel Legani of this year, he saw that this Helam is really the Helam of Elikus, of Helam Ha'atzmi. They did not see that. They just saw Helam. They just saw godliness is concealed. And look, a place that was once the holiest of holies is now a wilderness where animals roam, people do whatever they want. It's quite sad. Rabbi Akiva saw that this is all a result of the deep Helam. And obviously you want a Gilu, you want to be able to see godliness as well. Rabbi Akiva also did not want it to remain in that situation, but he was able to see behind the curtain, so to speak. He was able to look at it through God's eyes. When we see pain and suffering, we don't see it through God's eyes. We see it through our eyes, which is also real, because there's a real symptom, Nikra Kalim, and God concealed, and so on. The ultimate goal is to see existence through God, through our eyes, then through God, as God sees it through our eyes, means Mamalakalam and Das Tachten, seeing the God within on our terms, then to see it through God's eyes, and then joining the two, where our eyes and God's eyes are all joined as one. That will be lost in love. Today we don't have that perception, at least not in the fullest sense of the word. I think that's a good way to frame it. Was that helpful?
Extremely.
Yeah.
Also, isn't it?
But you see how difficult it is, because, to see life not through our own eyes, even for a moment, is not so easy, because we're self-absorbed, self-interest, and we have very limited myopic vision. What can I say?
Yeah, that's why it's so challenging.
Yeah, but you know what? The good news is there's a lot to look forward to.
Go ahead, George.
I was going to say also to what we were discussing also yesterday, with the Malchut, that was the whole thing of Kriyat Yam Suf, that the Malchut opened up and split. But it says when Mashiach comes La'atid Lavo, there's going to be Bina, is splitting, the Euphrates splitting to 7 branches. So that means that the splitting of the Bina, so that would be that when Mashiach comes, to be able to reach much higher level at the level of Bina, and not just Malchut.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we're stopping here. Let me stop the recording, and then I'll give you my schedule. We don't need it on the recording, right?
Well, people listening might want it.